Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to St. Louis. So thank you all very much for coming to the 80th Annual APOR Conference and the 78th Annual WAPOR Conference. I am Gina Waleko. I'm APOR Conference Chair on the APOR Executive Council, and I'm a staff user experience researcher at Google. It's taken a lot of work by a lot of different people to get us here, and I want to start by thanking all of you, presenters, attendees, volunteers, exhibitors, of course, and of course our sponsors, for working together and making all of this possible. Without all of you, we wouldn't be here. So before we get started with the plenary, I want to thank our Executive Council for all of their hard work, all of their leadership, and our truly amazing APOR staff for their tireless efforts. They have worked very, very hard to create a fantastic conference experience for all of us. So now, to start us off, once again, a huge thank you to APOR conference sponsors. We really could not do this without you, nor would we be able to have done this without APOR's sponsorship subcommittee and their chair, Darby Steiger. Darby, can you stand up? Wave at us. Now I'd like to thank all of our sponsors and exhibitors for your generous support this year, and I especially want to thank our sustaining sponsor, Virtual Incentives. I encourage all of you to connect with our exhibitors this week throughout the mobile app and in the exhibit hall, and learn about the great work that they're all doing. If you have any questions, please contact the APOR staff at info@apor.org or stop by the registration area. I also want to give a great big thank you to all of the chairs of our APOR conference subcommittees. So first, to Emily Alvarez for leading our local events subcommittee. Emily. So Emily, with the help of our APOR staff, put together outstanding documentation. She is a St. Louis local, and she provided us with excellent information about what to do, what to see here in St. Louis. I encourage you all to look at the local guide that they put together, and I'm really grateful for the work that she did to the betterment of all of our experience here in St. Louis. So second, I would like to thank Kristen Dwan and Mandy Lancaster for leading our APOR engagement subcommittee. Mandy wasn't able to join us, but Kristen, can you stand up? We'll just give her a clap. Kristen and Mandy have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to coordinate all of our pre-conference events, our welcoming activities here, including the Conference 101 webinar, the Ambassador Program, the networking opportunities for our newer and our younger members. Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Mandy, for all of your outstanding work on the committee and for doing what you can to make this conference happen and have an inclusive and welcoming environment. And then finally, I'd like to thank the entire conference committee for their guidance, their wisdom, their time throughout the entire planning process. Thank you to you all.
Okay, good afternoon also from my side. It's such a pleasure to have this joint event, and in my role as the chair of the Conference Committee for WAPOR, I want to welcome you all this year to the WAPOR Annual Conference as well. Our conferences bring together the strong APOR community, which is also clearly the majority here, but we also succeeded to bring more than 150 participants from different areas of the globe to St. Louis. And let me start by saying how happy I am to see so many familiar faces and also so many new ones. We have got researchers, practitioners, students here at our joint event, the lively US community and researchers coming together from all over the world. Of course, an event like this doesn't just happen, and I also want to take a moment to sincerely thank our sponsors. It is this year 3D, then Survey Research Lanka, Force, a company from Switzerland, Langer Research Associates, and the Survey Research Center from Sungkyuan University, where our former conference chair, Chibum Kim, decided to sponsor our short courses. Your support make, of course, all of this possible, and we are truly grateful for that. I really also want to like to thank the amazing members of the WAPOR Conference Committee. That's Timothy Johnson, Olga Kamenchuk, Chase Harrison, Henning Silber, and Jonathan Evans. And last but not least, I also want to mention our executive director of WAPOR, Ksenia Kitsilova, who is always the leading person behind the scenes. And the working spirit of my conference committee is really great. Without you all, I can really say we simply wouldn't be here today. If you are present in the room, please stand up and give us a wave. Be nice. Finally, I also want to thank at least 4 key members of our Executive Council who always acted as advisors and supporters of our conference planning. First, I want to mention our newly elected president, Christian Herpfer, who is a great leader and always supportive. I also want to thank our past president, Robert Chung, who continually enriches WAPOR with his creativity and innovative approaches. And I also want to thank Julia, our secretary, treasurer, who takes great care of our finances, often reminding us that our great ideas need a solid foundation in reality. And I also want to thank our newly elected vice president, Colin Irwin, who brings incredible energy to advancing free public opinion research with the aim of building a better society and helping to resolve conflicts. Please, once again, if you're present in the room, please stand up and give us a wave. So I just want to say a few final words about our WAPOR conference theme. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah. This slide is probably missing, yeah, so I just highlighted. Yeah, we are talking about the evolving landscapes of election polls, challenges, biases, and innovations in a polarized world. And I think it's very important to highlight the comparative aspect. At the one hand, global comparative perspectives are essential, not just to understand why polls sometimes miss the mark, but also to uncover how the political and cultural contexts shape the response behavior. And I think that's also a very nice transition now to our joint plenary session ahead of us. And so once again, welcome everybody from the WAPOR side. Thank you for being here, and I wish you all great few days ahead. Thank you.
So the APOR conferences include many wonderful traditions, including plenary sessions, to address broad issues that face our field. It is sometimes a struggle to find a topic that interests everyone in APOR, but this year's topic seemed clear in light of what is most recently affecting a great number of us, both home and abroad. This year's plenary is titled How 2024 Election Polls Performed and Informed. In this plenary, we will explore what election polls and results illuminate about voters in the 2024 US presidential election and elections around the world. This expert panel will discuss the most important factors that drove Trump's victory, The session will also review the accuracy of 2024 election polls in multiple countries, the effectiveness of changes to survey methods in recent years, and the biggest challenges ahead. Lastly, experts will share how advances in computing and AI and machine learning. This conversation will be moderated by Scott Clement, the polling director for the Washington Post. He has conducted national and local surveys on politics, the economy, the workplace, and social issues since joining the Post in 2011. And he previously worked on polling teams at the Pew Research Center and ABC News. So we will now turn the microphone over to Scott to introduce our plenary speakers.
All right. Thank you so much, Gina, for that introduction. I'm excited to get started. I'm very delighted to moderate this really stellar panel of experts to talk about these important issues, and I will introduce them one by one. So first off, Becca Siegel is a political strategist and data expert specializing in the intersection of data, strategy, and program. Most recently, she served as senior advisor on the 2024 Harris and Biden campaigns, overseeing polling, analytics, and voter outreach strategy. Becca began her career as a community organizer and worked on multiple campaigns in her home state of Colorado. Next up is Brent Buchanan. Brent is a president and founder of Signal, an international public opinion, messaging, strategy, and data analytics firm. The award-winning and fastest-growing firm pioneered emotive analysis, AI processes for surveys, message mapping, and segmentation targeting. Signal has served as pollster on international, corporate, presidential, U.S. Senate, gubernatorial, congressional, and parliamentary campaigns. In addition, his firm has worked for the Trump campaign and affiliated groups in 2016, 2020, and 2024. Next up is Josh Pasek. Josh is professor of communications and media and political science, faculty associate in the Center for Political Studies, and core faculty in the Michigan Institute for Data Science at the University of Michigan. His research explores how new media and psychological processes each shape political attitudes, public opinion, and political behaviors. Josh is also chair of APOR's 2024 Election Task Force, which is analyzing the performance of polls. And finally, Claire Dran. Claire is a professor of methodology in the Department of Sociology at the Université de Montréal. Her research focuses on how methodological choices affect the quality of electoral polling across different countries. She has held leadership roles in WAPOR, serving as Secretary-Treasurer from 2009 to 2014, and as President from 2017 to 2018. We'll get started with a group discussion, and then for the final 10 minutes, we'll invite folks to ask questions of the panel or make comments at that microphone. So I'll give a little signal closer to then when we get into that. Here for our panel. All right, Josh, can I start off with you? My first question was, what are the most important takeaways from the performance of the 2024 pre-election polls in the U.S.?
Yeah, so first let me apologize to everybody. We're close to done on the report, but not completely, so it will be out hopefully fairly soon. But I think what we found in everything that we've looked at so far is, polls did somewhat better this year, but there are still some structural issues. To the extent that we see that there seems to be sort of a continued bias in favor of the Democrats in polling, it seems to be concentrated in districts that lean toward the Republicans. And what I mean by that is that we seem to be undercounting Trump voters in Republican-leaning districts, not in Democratic-leaning ones. And so that implies that it's about something related to our ability to reach those voters or their awareness of how they're going to end up voting, rather than some kind of systematic not telling pollsters exactly how they're going to behave. The other thing that I would say is sort of a really fascinating one about this year that I think we're going to discuss even a little bit later is the extent to which the variance is down a lot, that there's a lot less variability in the results that we were seeing in polls this cycle compared to in other cycles. Our sense on the committee from the stuff that we've looked at, and I'll get more into it because I know there's a question later on this, is that it's not about sort of pollsters cheating and trying to tag some metric that somebody else had, you know, given them in terms of what else was out there, but that it probably has a lot more to do with how things are being weighted right now, that there's a lot more processes trying to correct for partisanship in the way that surveys are constructed in the first place and in the way that they're being handled on the back end that's pulling down that variance. And whether that's a good or bad thing, I don't know, but it clearly was a key change over the course of the last cycle.
Thank you, Josh. That's great. Claire, I want to turn to you for a little more international look. I'm just curious if you can paint for us an overall landscape of how electoral polls differ in Canada, Europe, and other parts of the world compared to the US context.
First, I checked Canada, UK, France, Germany, Australia, Hungary, and Poland. The number of pollsters in an election is about between 8 and 12. Okay? And the same are there from election to election. Sometimes there is one that leaves, sometimes two come in. So in the US, in the last 3 elections, you had 86 different pollsters organizations conducting polls. Only 9 of them were there in the 3 elections. So it compares with other countries. You have 9 professional pollsters. No, plus 24 who were there in 2 elections. So it leaves 53 that just pop up in 1 election, and sometimes with only 1 poll. So why is that? And why is it important? First, it's important because we keep saying, you know, the pollsters improved this year from last year. Not the same people, okay? It's not that pollster who improved. It's, you know, like in 2020, there were about 30 new pollsters. So, and why does it happen? I think because of 2-3 things. First, because you have an electoral college, you have swing states, you have different configuration that makes it more important makes it that you have many pollsters, and you have elections every 2 years, and everybody looks at what's happening in the US, so you have a number of pollsters coming from outside the US who enter also, from UK, from Canada, from Brazil. So this is, the second point, I'm gonna go rapidly on that, is there is no regulation. And there is regulation, strict government regulation in France and Mexico. In France, pollsters have to give their data. It is checked. And they have to say from the beginning, from January 1st, how they're going to wait, and they cannot change it till the election. However, we had a law in Canada. Nobody enforced it. I'm not sure this is the best thing. There is a law in the state of New York. You've never heard about it? No, okay. So a law is useful when it is enforced. So what happens in other countries is pollsters get together and they have associations and they ask for transparency, a bit like what APO did. And this seems to work a lot better to, you know, make sure that all the pollsters who do electoral polls will have good methods and transparency in their methods.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. I want to turn next to Becca and describe in broad terms how the Harris campaign used polling and other research methods to shape campaign messages to an electorate focused on the economy.
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much for having me here. I was thinking, I go to a lot of political conferences, and all of the exciting stuff there happens in the hallways, we joke. But here, I do think the interesting, exciting stuff happens in the rooms, which is genuinely very exciting. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. As Scott mentioned, I sat across sort of polling, analytics, and then what we did with all of that data on the Harris campaign. And I think our approach generally to this incoming data and the decisions we were trying to make was that we wanted to diversify the sources of data we were getting and use as many as we could. We wanted to always triangulate what we were getting, so look at the results from one thing and triangulate it with the results from something else. And then we wanted to use data as an input into decisions and know when data could and could not answer questions. Final thing I'll say is we wanted our data to be useful. And that's actually, I think anyone's data can be very useful, but that is not the same necessarily as striving for perfect accuracy. The important thing for us is what are we doing with this data? Now, accurate polling is more useful, but we were really careful to design things that would lead us to answer the questions we were trying to answer. So just to sort of set the scene on what we were doing within sort of our data collection operation, we were every week running tracking polls to figure out both the state of the race, but more importantly, who are the voters that will decide this election, so who should we be talking to? And just to give a sense, that was like in the 12,000 IDs per week sort of range. We were doing message polling, so we were figuring out who to talk to. We were figuring out what to say to them with sort of more traditional message polling and also focus groups. That was, fewer IDs because they were longer polls. We were doing a lot of content testing, so that was individual pieces of content that fit into our messaging framework. That was a lot of IDs, upwards 50,000, even more per week. And then I think really importantly, we were doing a lot of listening. So we were using sort of always-on qual boards and always-on panels to hear what voters were hearing. And then I sort of thought of it as like a cycle. So we would sort of capture what they were hearing, and if it rose to a level of importance that we thought would change either who our target voters were or what they needed to hear, we would sort of feed that input into this machine of collecting data. So, in total, we were talking about more than probably 70,000 IDs in a week. And overall, I think we collected something like 1.3 million IDs. But I'll say that sounds like a lot, I guess. To me it does. But, the challenge this cycle, frankly, is that contact rates are lower than they've ever been. So we actually had to collect fewer IDs than we have in the past and be really conscientious about decisions we were making between, daily tracking versus weekly tracking, or we're gonna try to prioritize answering economic questions over something else. So I think that's actually like an emerging, challenging thing, is that we're running out of people to talk to, which is new. It's not, for us, a money issue so much as it is we're out of people in these swing states to talk to. So that led us to also, I think, have to think differently about our data collection.
So thank you, Becca. And then to Brent, how important were less engaged voters to Trump's victory last year, and how did he and his campaign turn them out?
Yeah, so the Trump campaign spent a significant amount of resource on figuring out how to reach lower engaged voters. And this is a large function of this shift that we've seen over the last couple decades that we call the diploma divide, where if you have a college degree or higher, 30 years ago, you were very likely to be a center-right or Republican, if we're talking in the US context. And if you were working class, you were more likely to be Democratic. And that diploma divide has been going all along, and Trump just kind of threw gasoline on that fire in 2016, and then did it again somehow in 2024. And when you look at these voters, they're just really, really hard to get because they're not paying attention. I have news for those of you, and me included, who are involved in political opinion research. We are weird. We do not look like, think like, act like, consume information like the rest of the world who makes the decisions on who gets elected in the US and other countries. And so one thing that we were doing with the Trump campaign was, as Becca was talking about triangulating, is that when we were getting the info flow, so have you seen, read, or heard anything about the two candidates? Where did you see, read, or hear that? Was it mostly positive, negative, or a mix of the two? And we were looking at that traditional information flow, but then comparing it to one other question that we started putting on all of our surveys and actually use as a quality control mechanism now, and that is, how much attention do you pay to the news? And because what you find out is those who are very engaged in politics tend to be more educated, and they tend to also pay attention to more news. And so it's a way that we can look at and understand who are we not getting, because we need a lot of people in the survey who say little to no news that they're paying attention to. And so what the Trump campaign found out was that most of these people were online. They were not watching broadcast television. They were not, of course, reading the newspaper. They were on social media, but they were actually more on YouTube than they were on what you would think of traditional social media of a TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. And so that is why all of a sudden you saw Donald Trump spend hours and hours and hours a day sitting down doing 1, 2, 3 hour podcasts that were mostly consumed on video, not on audio. Because as we all know, those of us who are involved in political campaigns, the candidate's time is the most valuable thing that you have. You can always go raise more money, you can run more ads, you cannot get more of the candidate's time. And if you look at where Donald Trump's time went, it inordinately went to non-traditional video-based podcast formats, because that was the only way that we could get in front of people who were not intentionally consuming political news.
Thank you, Brent. I'm just want to repeat how excited I am for the incredible perspectives we have on this panel today. I want to kick it to the overall crew, less structured bit on if anyone on the panel can share what you thought was the most important or most informative finding from polling or public opinion research during last year's presidential campaign. Any takers?
I'll take the first shot at this. The first was that online panels get a bad rap because of their non-probabilistic nature. We actually found that in 2022 midterms and 24 presidential election in the U.S. that it actually correctly predicted the error in both the Democrat direction in 22 and the Republican direction in 24. And it overlaps a lot with what I was just saying, is that those people inordinately get their information from online and other news sources. And that was the portion of the electorate that ended up deciding the election in both 22 and 24. And the other was that we pay a lot of attention to the emotions behind what people are saying. And so if they're saying this is the top issue, how are they talking about that? And then we use a product that we developed called Heartbeat that does emotional analytics and looks at the emotions driving that. And that was a better predictor than even somebody saying they liked or disliked a candidate or right direction or wrong track of the country.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well. To me, the really interesting thing about the elections this cycle, and what struck me, was just how static everything was. And I don't think, I think the modeling is part of that story, but I think part of the story is also that we really have a public that, if you reach them, they are going to give you the same opinion the whole way through the cycle in a way that wasn't necessarily true a decade or more ago, that we really have locked in voters in a very closely divided public. And I think that is the nature of American politics right now, but it's a fascinating one to think through the implications of, because it really is, it's different from the sort of old school you're persuading the middle model.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think polling did an extremely good job this cycle at identifying where we had problems. It was very easy, and early on we could see the groups that we were going to have problems with. In 2023, we could see the groups that we were going to have problems with. And when Kamala Harris became the top of the ticket, immediately we could see the shifts and the groups that we were going to have problems with. What was difficult, and what polling, I think, where we struggled, was how to solve those problems. And we just were not seeing the kind of movement that is helpful in calibrating your campaign's message. Maybe you guys were in the other direction, but I think it was really clear, and the polling was, as a top line, quite accurate. We were just reviewing our own stuff with now election, more complete results, and our absolute error was less than a point across the 7 battleground states. So we had a very good sense of what was going on. I think we really struggled to find things that would show movement, and that was what a lot of our focus was on. Was how can we remove variance in other ways so that we can see some movement, but I think that was difficult. It was a very static, you're totally right, March to November.
Perhaps two things. I have something that comes in my mind from Canada. following very seriously what was happening, I felt that the political parties did not listen to the polls that much. That's an impression from Canada. Not the voting intention, but some of the elements that were, you know, what people find important, how they see the candidates and things like that. This is my first point. In terms of methodology, the fact that there were no very substantial difference between modes means something also, because it means that I think the people who use web panel, for example, try to improve their modeling, I would say, in order to fix a few of the problems.
Just pairing off of that point, I feel like we're leading into this next element. In one of our prep calls for this, Brent mentioned this, there is no more persuasion, there's only persuasion to turn out. I wonder if you could elaborate on what you mean by that, what leads you to believe that, and then open it up for any nuance folks have on their perspective on that.
Well, I think Josh and Becca both hit on it of how static the electorate was, and it was above the surface, but there was a bit of a duck paddling underwater underneath, where you did see movements with certain voter groups that were responding to messages. And as we look at this persuasion to turn out, we were able to match back about 720,000 of our responses last year back to the voter file, back to once the states turned in their voter files of who voted. And it was really interesting to see, the difference between the states where there were significant amounts of advertising, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars being spent in the state, and then the state next to it had almost no race going on. And it could have been a blue state or a red state, it didn't matter. What was really interesting is that the states that had significant amounts of advertising performed very similarly to 2020, but every other state that didn't have a significant amount of advertising shifted to the right very hard. And so you can kind of see this difference between news information flow and just regular consumption compared to this hyper overdrive of advertising. And the reason that we say that there is no more persuasion, just persuasion to turn out, is because there is a shrinking middle across the electorate. And then as you get to this place with the diploma divide, I actually think that this turnout mechanism becomes more incumbent on parties of the right, because they have the less engaged, lower propensity, lower information consumer voters. But what happens is when the center and the left spend inordinate amount of money, it actually turns on the people on the right too. And so that's what we try to look at, is this comparison between spending and information flow, and how does that affect turnout? Because as you look at the shifts in what's happening under the surface, so little of it was actually people swapping from one candidate to another. It was coming from undecided to their candidate, or from not participating in prior surveys and telling us they weren't going to vote, now they're going to vote, and it's for a particular candidate. And they match the profile of basically everybody else already voting for that given candidate.
Yeah, maybe if I could add on I think, to your point of, for Republicans now this is an imperative. I think for Democrats, that is not true anymore to the same degree, because the low information voters who did not vote were even less supportive of us based on our estimates than those who did vote. And so, that's been a big shift over the last 10 years, is that lower engagement voters are much more conservative than they used to be, and likely, depending on how you define them, for the first time this cycle, are more likely to support a Republican than a Democrat. And so I think that totally changes the calculus on how we are weighing, the programs we're running. I totally agree that, the most persuasive people are often those who are less likely to vote. And that's because when people know who they want to vote for, they go vote for that person. And when they don't know who they want to vote for, they're less inclined to vote at all. So I think that's totally true. But for Democrats, I don't see that we can be successful by only doing turnout work, by only increasing turnout, even among our voters. I just think that pathway is difficult. Certainly, different in a midterm than in a general election, in a presidential election. But I think if presented with the facts, if they don't change in 4 years, I don't see that a Democratic presidential candidate could be successful by only increasing or changing the makeup of the electorate. They also will need to persuade people, I think.
And then just a little further on that, I'm curious what you all think about the idea of a connection between people's trust in institutions, their willingness to take our surveys, and trusting those survey results. Well, I've touched on this in some ways already, but I wonder if you can share how that impacts your work or how you see, survey results and interpret survey results.
I mean, definitely, at least when we come to people who are going to volunteer to start taking a whole bunch of surveys, right, with a particular company, when are they going to do that, right? At what point are they going to decide to, to jump in and become like a professional panelist in some degree? Those kinds of questions, I think, are ones that clearly have a trust level to them. But the people that get reached out to as well are going to determine whether they're going to participate or not based on what they think of, who's asking them. And we did see, I think in recent cycles, a bunch of sort of generalized discussion of whether the polls are accurate and what that might mean. And that's got to have an impact under the hood in who participates in them and when. I mean, the funny thing about election polling that really makes it sort of such a doozy is because it's so incredibly public and people hear about the results of election polls on a regular basis, right? They influence themselves. And so the results of the election are not independent of the existence of all the public election polls that we put out there. And that process is, it has a trust impact in multiple different respects in how people respond to it. It has an impact in sort of what people think the likely outcomes are and how likely they are to respond in different ways to it. And it's not clear that there's really a great way to get around that. I mean, internal polling that doesn't get released maybe has extra benefits in that particular regard. But for those of us that are putting it out in the public, like putting it out in the public is influencing the election in some way, not necessarily in a particular direction, but in terms of the perceptions of where things can and can't move.
Go ahead.
Yes, I really think there is some job to, trust in institution is not something that is stable and built in the person, okay? It's something that comes with the institutions doing their job. And first, if I come back to what I said at the beginning, if you have like 10 posters who go to the media and blah, 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 and they are known, and so it may be more easy for people to trust them. But even then, I've not seen anywhere, here or elsewhere, any organization saying, okay, we need to explain to people why they should answer polls, okay? Why it is important, why it will give better polls. There is nothing, no public, publicity or, this is something WAPOR could do. Second, respect the respondent, which means that I think we have to find new ways to reach respondent when they are ready to answer and in the way they are ready to answer. So this means, for me, it means mixed mode polls, it means being receptive to the respondent. When we had only telephone polls, we used to have appointment, if the person cannot answer now, we're going to call you later and things like that. We don't have that anymore. So perhaps we should be more attentive to the respondent, and if we want them to answer, we need to listen to them.
We did a study during the election last year asking individuals why they choose to respond to surveys and why they think they might not respond to another survey in the future. And looking specifically at younger respondents, the overwhelming sentiment was that they didn't feel that their response actually mattered to anybody, or that anybody would even see the response that they were giving into the survey. And so we started experimenting with two things combined after we tested them individually, and that was hyper-localization of the invite and an empowerment-based message included with the invitation to take the survey. And we saw over 40% increase in response rates from youth in doing those two things together. You know, this kind of goes along with the fact that, as I was talking about the diploma divide, those with higher education are actually 2 to 3 times more likely to take a survey on text-to-web. They're 4 to 5 times more likely to take a telephone-based survey, which complicates our ability to get the people we actually need to talk to when we're getting 2 to 5 times the response rate from the people that are low-hanging fruit. And then another, once we compared all of our data at the end to the voter file, what we found out is that, you know, we tend to screen out people who say that they're unsure or they're definitely not voting. So we went back and looked at all the people who responded to our surveys with those two and got screened out. We always screen those people out to demos, by the way, so they don't just drop off the survey totally. We just dump them down to the demographic section, and most of them tend to take the demographic survey. And we found that there was a large partisan disparity of people who said that they were going to, if they were unsure and a Republican on the file, 79% of those folks actually ended up voting. Democrats who said the same, it was only 73%, and it was a bigger disparity when they just flat out said, I'm not voting. It was 54% of Republicans versus 40% of Democrats. But then when you take that and say, were they a single voter household, which means only one registered there, or there are multiple voters registered in the household, you get even higher numbers of individuals telling you unsure or not voting in multi-voter households that actually did vote. 88% of Republicans in a multi-voter household that said they were unsure if they were going to vote actually went out to vote in this election, as an example.
I was just thinking, it's funny that the young voter thinks that their response won't matter when they have the highest weight of all, probably, in the whole survey. Matters extra, lucky them. Maybe that's what we should tell them. I was thinking, I don't have good solutions to this, but I would double down on the problem, which is, you know, the voters who don't trust institutions are like the battleground right now. We're the battleground in 2024. Maybe won't be in the future, but certainly we're. And when I say don't, I guess I'm broadly talking about voters who are not interested in politics, who are not engaged in politics, who don't, you know. So if that's the group and that's the battleground, they are critically important to talk to. They are very hard to talk to. And ironically, we are definitionally, when I talk about we, are definitionally worst at guessing how they feel, because definitionally we are very different from them by the fact that we are at a conference on polling, right? And so I think that it's tough, because when I'm sort of sitting in these rooms with ad makers or messaging gurus, right, like their instinct is to trust their gut. And their gut could not be further away from the voters who they need to now reach. And that's more the case now than it's been before. So my sort of only like offering is that I think for researchers, this is the place where more investment could have the highest dividends in terms of how we can be more accurate, certainly with top line, but actually also just with messaging and movement and persuasion and what voters care about over the next 4 years. So that's, you know, I think if there's one thing to invest, there's many things to invest time in, but I certainly think this could be a really valuable place.
Thanks so much, Becca. I want to open it up to members of the audience who'd like to share a quick question or comment. There's a podium right in the center of the ballroom with a microphone. I'll ask if you come up, please speak clearly into the microphone. It was a little muffled in some of our testing, so that'll help us hear it all.
The podium? Hi, hello. Hi, I just had a question, actually picking up on Becca's point. When you're talking about sort of information flows, particularly with higher information, lower information voters, what I was curious about is you had this sort of thing that popped on our radar in 22 of democracy, right? This democracy theme that kept going on and on for a lot of people who were particularly supporting Democratic candidates. I'm curious, did you find that falling apart as a messaging that was salient for those lower information voters in your data, or did you see that democracy wasn't a theme that, you know, because there was sort of after the post-switch from, I'm sorry for this popping, after the post-switch for Harris taking over for Biden, a lot of messaging changed from it being away from that democracy theme. And I think it came back later on towards the end. So I'm just curious how you relate to that sort of theme of issues with democracy, or a question of people's concerns about democracy. And it seemed sort of similar question for the Trump campaign as well.
I guess that's for me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And for the Trump campaign as well, too, sorry.
No, I think,
yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, democracy as an issue, well, I guess I should say this. Democracy as an issue is when we say democracy, it's like unclear exactly what we're talking about.
It means Donald Trump.
Well, so that's sort of the point I want to actually like differentiate. So I think there's like yes, Donald Trump will, like destroy these important institutions. And for undecided voters, I don't think there's a lot of trust in those institutions already. So that's not so persuasive to undecided voters. I would totally take that case. I think there's a difference between we are upholding democracy, or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris is upholding democracy, versus just attacking Trump for other reasons. And I think that was still important to do. I maintain that that was important to do. I don't think the attacks necessarily were about upholding institutions, but I think they were about sort of like the person that you want in the Oval Office, and temperament, and other sort of values-based arguments. And the reason that we thought that was important to do is because Trump was more popular in 2024 than he was in 2020. And so, and close to 50% in some of these swing states already. So there was no way for us to win without pulling some support away from Trump that he already had. So that's sort of where I think, and I think in the end, people sort of were like, it's a democracy argument, but it wasn't really a democracy argument, it was a contrast argument about the character of the two candidates. I don't think that's the same as democracy, and I agree that I don't think democracy was particularly persuasive to undecided voters. Certainly high information Democrats cared a lot about that issue, but those were not the people we were trying to win.
Yeah, we saw it on the Trump team as a dog whistle to mean Donald Trump. And we saw it as a turnout tactic, because that's what our polling showed, that it only worked for people who were near 100% likely to vote for Kamala Harris. Really, vote against Donald Trump is the better way to look at it. And even in our May national survey that we just wrapped up a few days ago, of people who are not definitely Democrat or Republican on the midterm congressional ballot, threats to democracy is like in the low single digits as a top priority for them. So that was how we always viewed the democracy argument, that it was not a persuasion message at all.
I would say that's not how we thought about it, though, for the record. I think and you guys won, so.
We loved that they were closing with that. We knew that was the wrong close.
All right, well, next question, please.
My name is Nikki Bell. Is this on? Yes. My name is Nikki Bell. I'm a data analytics professional and also an adjunct professor at GW School of Media and Public Affairs. Something Josh said about the feedback loop between the polls we produce and the polls we're going to see in the future, had me thinking about communication. We've talked a lot about accuracy and precision, but not as much about how we communicate the uncertainty in our polling estimates to the public. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the progress you've seen us make towards better communicating about poll results, but also where you think we could do better going forward.
I think that's a really fascinating question, and I have a lot of perhaps conflicting thoughts on it, so excuse me as I run through a few of them. But I think in practice, the structural environment, even starting out 2024, was just better for that communication story. And the reason is because there was this sort of sense on some level that the polls had not done so well the last two times, which I think was partially but not as completely accurate in 2016 and definitely accurate in 2020. But that sense led, I think, then to a recognition of sort of the inherent lack of precision that we kind of need to highlight, right? And the fact is, most people today, when they encounter public polling, aren't actually encountering public polling. They're encountering an aggregation of public polling put together by some other service that is either doing a poll of polls or some kind of broad model on it. And all of that implies sort of a heavier level of sort of certainty and precision in what you end up with than the data is actually capable of, right? We are working in a dynamic environment where we're trying to predict a future behavior that people haven't fully figured out yet, with a whole bunch of partial data and rather complex models to deal with the fact that only in practice about 2% of people are responding to most of the stuff we're putting out there, right? Like, that is the environment we are in. And from that perspective, when we're trying to do something in the future where we can influence that future too in some ways, and all this is happening, there's just an inherent limit to how precise surveys can be. And it's really important that this is a problem where there is that kind of inherent limit and that we communicate that to some degree. Because yes, it's, things like GeoTV or little differences in sort of how things work in the last few days of a campaign can push the world 2 percentage points one way or another, right? That's actually not that much in terms of, the grand scheme of things. And yet for us, adding or subtracting 2 percentage points to the final error is a completely different ballgame in our perception of how well we do.
Thank you, Josh. I think Claire wanted to add something.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, aggregators. Okay, 2 things. I'm really, really against this thing about the probability of winning. I think that people don't understand that because we have this also for the rain, probability of rain tomorrow. Do you put your umbrella on it? It's problematic. Second, I'm asking myself if we should go back to the 1 decimal, because right now it looks the polls look a lot more similar because 44.6 is exactly the same thing as 45.4, and there is 0.8 between the two, so that all this looks like 44. So this is a problem. That's it. I stop.
Well, our clock is running down by the second, so I want to just take a moment to thank our wonderful panel of Becca, Brent, Josh, and Claire. Please give them all a hand. I'm sure all will be willing to take additional questions one-on-one if you approach them soon.
Can I have your attention for just a minute? Maybe even less than a minute? Okay, so I wanted to say one thing quickly. Is there another slide? Yes, right here. Okay, we just talked about elections and polling, but I want to encourage those of you who are interested in this year's AI conference theme to join us at the first workshop to bridge natural language processing and public opinion research. The workshop is going to be held in October in Montreal during the Conference on Language Modeling. You can visit the workshop website for details, including the upcoming call for papers. And then now I want you all, please, to join us in the exhibitors hall. That's across the hall for snacks and for APOR's first poster session of the conference, and that includes the student poster competition, so please come talk to the students about their posters, and then don't forget to join us tonight at the APOR-WAPOR joint welcome reception. We have a lot of welcoming activities here. We're very welcoming. And that starts at 5:30 p.m. in the exhibit hall. And there's also going to be food, drinks, and then just tons of networking opportunities. So can we give one more round of applause for the plenary participants and for Scott?